everyone, Clio here, and today I'm going to be looking at my 5 best books on Goodreads and my 5 worst books on Goodreads, meaning that I'm going to be looking at the 5 books with the best average rating on my Goodreads and the 5 books with the lowest average rating on my Goodreads. Let's find out. I have some ideas, of course, about which books are going to make it into that list, but let's find out officially what the numbers are. So, future Clio popping in to say that I lost my screen captures, so I had to refilm them, and you will probably see that there is an extra book that made its way into it. It's basically a book that I finished in the meantime that ended up being in the top 10 list. So that I won't be talking about in this video. In any case, it's also a very recent release, so probably it will go down the rankings at some point. And then there are some orders that I think also shifted between the time in which I actually made this video and between the time in which the screen capture that will end up being in this video was taken. So yeah, these orders are constantly changing, as you can tell. I think I filmed this video 1 week ago, so in the span of 1 week time these stats are already changing. So it's probably a video that I can do again in like a year time and see what has changed, which ones have endured, which ones are really staying at that top, and which ones are shifting around. So I'm going to be having a screen capture over here running that is going to give you the results. So I'm going to the My Books page and going to all of my read books, and let's look at what it's going to give me. I'm going to be zooming into this one as well a little bit, I think. Let's just add a zoom on this. Yeah. So this is not what I want to see. This is based off of the last time that I've added it. So let's go to average rating. Alright, and so at the top, as I mentioned, we have Stormlight Archive. So we have double entries for Words of Radiance, which I read twice, so that could make sense. And then we have The Way of Kings. So these are all together. So Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson is a epic fantasy series. It will contain 10 books. Those 10 books will be like 2 overarching plot lines of 5 books, and the 4th one in this series is coming out in November. I'm absolutely dying for it. As you can see, based on my rating, I gave all of these a 5-star rating. I think Oathbringer, so far the 3rd book in the series, has been my personal least favorite, though I definitely know a whole lot of people who also think it's the best one. Stormlight Archive is quite difficult to explain, so I'm just going to say that it has a whole lot of different perspectives, and it's a world in which people can harness the power of storms in order to create magic. However, this is kind of a sort of lost art, and so it's something that people don't really believe in anymore, but we will see how the worst of times bring out the best of people sometimes. So yeah, that's very vague and possibly wrong premise to give for this one, because it's just such a convoluted plot that is difficult to talk about. Next up, we do get Harry Potter, which is also normal for it to be so high because it has so much nostalgia to it. A lot of people read it when they were young. I'm one of the Harry Potter generation as well, so you can also see that I gave Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows 5-star rating. I definitely do not want to promote J.K. Rowling's content on my channel, so that's all we're going to be saying about that book for the moment. And then we get to Quiet. So first of all, we have Oathbringer there, which I'm not counting, I'm counting all of them together. So basically we had Stormlight Archive in position 1, Harry Potter in position 2, let's say. Position 3, Crooked Kingdom, 6 of Crows. So as you can tell, my rating for that one is going to be very different, because I did not have a good experience with Crooked Kingdom. I mean, I liked Crooked Kingdom just fine. Crooked Kingdom is the sequel to 6 of Crows. The 6 of Crows is a sort of YA high story fantasy plot in which we're looking at this crew of thieves mainly who are tasked with the job of breaking somebody out of prison. I liked it just fine, but it was very predictable in my feeling, and I did that sort of like typical YA thing where everybody needs to hook up with somebody and there's too much angst and romance in it for my personal preference. So it did not break the sort of like bad rep that I've been having with YA in the last few years. And then fourth different entry into this one is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, which I'm absolutely happy to see there. So I read Saga in its entirety this year, absolutely fell in love. So Saga is a sci-fi comic book series in which we are looking at a sort of like Romeo and Juliet type of storyline. So we have two characters from differing species. These species are at war with one another. However, these two characters are able to cross the divide, realize that there's much more that they have in common than that they that divides them, and they end up getting a child together. But then they have to kind of cross the galaxy trying to find a place where they can grow up in peace, where they can raise their daughter in peace and quiet. So those are the first four entries to our lists. Then we have a whole lot of Harry Potter coming in there. And then we get to number 5, which would be The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss. So this is the Kingkiller Chronicle. I definitely would say that The Name of the Wind should have a higher rating than The Wise Man's Fear does, but okay, sometimes Goodreads is a bit weird. Or maybe you guys are just all weird. So the Kingkiller Chronicles is another epic fantasy series. Epic fantasy definitely does seem to be very good for the ratings. But so the Kingkiller Chronicle is a series in which we're looking at a young boy called Kvot. We are looking at his life story, and basically at the onset of this novel, we already know that he has done these amazing things in his life, and we basically have a chronicler who is looking for Kvot because he's disappeared from the map. And so we are introduced to present day Kvot, who is actually just a guy running a tavern in the middle of nowhere, and over the course of 3 nights, 3 books, he will be telling his life story to this chronicler. And so the first book, the first night, is very much looking at his childhood and going through the beginning of his university career. I definitely think that Name of the Wind is a beautiful book. I absolutely adored that one and very much liked the storyline we got in there. One of the scenes that I often reread is when he is doing a musical performance, and people who've read it will probably know what I'm referring to. But so yeah, I definitely do think that there's merit to it, but I need a third book at some point, and the second book was such a letdown. And I will actually say that my interest in this series has totally disappeared because I've had to wait for that third book for too long. So yeah, if it comes out, I guess I'll be reading it, but at this point I'm not even waiting for it anymore. At this point I'm just like, I'm never gonna get it. I've kind of assumed that now, so I guess Patrick Rothfuss needs to prove me wrong there. Moving on to the 6th entry in this list, and that will be the Deva Trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty with the Empire of Gold. The rating that you see there doesn't really fully reflect my feelings for this series, but I did dislike the third one the most. The third one is highest on this list because it is a recent release, so basically the most people who have read it have actually loved it, and because it is like a third book in the series, basically only people who've read the first 2 will read it, and so it automatically gets a higher rating. So maybe in a couple of years this book won't be on that list anymore. But yeah, we're going off of present day data. So the Empire of Gold, or like the Deva Trilogy, is a trilogy that is Middle Eastern inspired epic fantasy. Absolutely love this world, and very much love the first 2 entries into this series. So in this one we're mainly following our protagonist called Nari, who at the beginning of this book she's kind of a swindler living in the streets of Cairo, but she has this sort of mysterious past and these mysterious abilities that she doesn't really know where they come from. And so she has abilities for healing that are a little bit uncharacteristic, and she knows a lot of languages, and there's this sort of memory of a past language that she's never heard of. But through circumstances she ends up accidentally summoning a jinn, and so she's taken away by this jinn to the capital of the jinn because he considers her to be a sort of half-breed, and they are not allowed to live in the realm of the mortals, in the world of the humans. And so this series is very much a political intrigue series in which we're going to be looking at these sort of different like different groups within the Jinn society. However, I very much loved that aspect of it, but I feel like that kind of got washed down the drain at the end of the second book when the story takes a little bit of a shift. And I absolutely loved the sort of political intrigue and political build-up we had in that first more or less the entirety of the first 2 books, and then I didn't like the shift we get at the end of the second book, and therefore I also didn't like the third book, because then like I felt like a whole lot of nuance left the building the moment we got to the third book. Like we had a very nuanced and politically deep story before that, and then in that third book we're very much just looking at the sort of like black and white storyline of that person is a villain, we are the good guys, and we need to destroy the villain. Whereas before I felt like there was a lot more of a grey line to be run. And like, yeah, a lot of those things that I loved about those first 2 books kind of left in the third book, so that's why that third book is there with a low rating on my side. I mean, 3 is not a low rating. Still like the world, still like these characters, but yeah, I just didn't like the way that that story developed in that one. I would also say that this is a good one in terms of romance. There is a lot of romance, there is some romance emphasis in the first book, for example, but I do definitely think that the romance plotline throughout the series does develop in an interesting way, and there are definitely a lot of parts in this series in which romance is not at the center of the story, which I do like seeing in my fantasy series. Next up we get to The Lord of the Rings. So I think we're at 7 now. So the 7th highest rated book or like series, I will just have to call this the highest rated series on my list, is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. This also has the 3rd book in the series in there. The Return of the King is also my favorite story, at least. It's my favorite movie. I do know that there are some differences between the books and the movies in terms of like which scene plays out in which book, but I'm going to be rereading this soon, and I will know my opinion about this again, because I do remember, like, I love this story, but I do remember not really being blown away with the writing style, because it's just a little bit too dense for me, and I also don't like the constant inclusion of poems and songs into the story. I know that's part of the reason why people love it, but yeah, I've never really been good with poetry, for example, so these songs and poems and stuff like that, that basically just like I read over them and they mean nothing to me. But yeah, I definitely do respect The Lord of the Rings a whole lot, love that story, and definitely do want it there on that list, so very happy to see it included. Number 8 is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin, and so this is actually the 3rd book that is on there, and that is also one of my favorite ones for the series. But as a whole, I would say that I am not a massive fan of A Song of Fire and Ice, of Ice and Fire, Song of Ice and Fire. So for those of you who don't know, this is basically Game of Thrones, the book series, which is another one of these series that we've been waiting forever for the sequel. I think we've waited as long for Winds of Winter as we've waited for the 3rd book in Patrick Rothfuss's series. So at this point, it's also something that I've lost all interest in. I guess I will be picking it up when it comes out, just to see how the book will end up versus the series, because there are definitely changes that the series made to the series, to the book series, and there definitely is one character in particular, for example, that pops up again in the books that never made a reappearance in the series. But yeah, even if we get Winds of Winter, we still need to get the final book in the series. So yeah, I mean, once when I'm old and like in a retirement home, I might have this full series available for me and read it. But yeah, A Song of Ice and Fire is just one that the writing style doesn't fully work for me. We maybe also just have too many characters, and like I definitely remember the first one could have easily turned me away from this series, because I didn't like the reading from Ned Stark, and you got Ned Stark's perspective a whole lot in that book, and so I actually didn't like it. And then I got to like it a little bit more as we moved on. I definitely like Arya, for example, a whole lot, but there definitely are a lot of perspectives that I don't really care about, a lot of people that I don't care about and so don't remember, and then when you see the series and you're like, ah, that's that character. So I'm not invested enough in this series to want to continue, I think. So we have Name of the Wind again. So 9th will be Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. So this is a sci-fi, YA sci-fi series that has 2 books out at this point. Skyward is the first one of these, and I think that that is also rightfully the one that has the highest rating, because I do definitely think it's better than the second one at this point. But so this is a sci-fi series in which we're looking at our protagonist called Spencer? Yeah, I think so. We're looking at our protagonist called Spencer, and she has she's living in a society that's very much centered around bravery, and she wants to be one of the sort of top spots. She wants to go after one of these sort of top spots within the society. She wants to become a space fighter, because this is very much a society that centers around survival. They are constantly under attack from these aliens, that are invading their planet, and so they all live underground, and then they have these fighter pilots that need to defend their planets. However, her father used to be a fighter pilot, but he abandoned mission, and so there's this huge stain upon her and her family, because they are branded as cowards, which is basically the worst thing that can happen to you in this society. Now Spencer is determined. She wants to be a fighter pilot. She also has a natural talent for it. She is very much a sort of obnoxious character at the beginning. I totally hated this character at the beginning, but I definitely grew to love her a lot, and it's, even though she was very annoying, I definitely that doesn't stop my enjoyment of a book, for example, and I definitely did grow to love her a lot, and a lot of the side characters in this story as well. So, wait, because this was 6, so Lord of the Rings was 7, Game of Thrones was 8, Skyward was 9, so only one left, and that's the first non-series, the first non-sci-fi or fantasy, and that is The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, so a YA book. So The Hate You Give is a story in which we're looking at our protagonist called Star. Star is, at the beginning of this book, she is kind of driving home from a party with a friend of her, and they are stopped by the cops. Being African American, they definitely don't feel very comfortable in this situation, or definitely scared of being stopped, of being pulled over by the police, with due cause, because her friend gets shot at by the police and he dies. And this book is very much about Star coming into her own, learning to deal with what has happened to her, and learning to raise her voice. Definitely loved this one, and thought it was cleverly done, because Star is an African American teenager. However, she is going to an almost all white high school, and she does have a white boyfriend. So it talks about a lot of race issues involved with that, a lot of prejudices involved with that. I definitely think that these elements that the author introduced into the setup of that situation definitely helped to dive into a lot of subject matter to do with racism surrounding the idea that somebody who has had a great education, who presents herself well, will be treated in a different way than a African American individual who, for example, does drugs or is dressed in a hood style or something like that. And I definitely think that that was set up very nicely within this book. Very much loved this book, loved the family relationships a whole lot as well. And I'm very interested as well, because I think in 2021 there is this sort of side story to this one coming out, in which we're following one of the other characters that we're introduced to into this world, which I definitely also want to be checking out. So I'm very happy that that made it into that top 10, and as you can see, I also very much liked it. And so yeah, that is rounding off my top 10 of the highest rated books that I read on Goodreads. And yeah, the next video that I will have out in this sort of series will be the lowest rated ones. We'll see what happens there, because I'll probably have to skip over quite a lot of them, because some of them will just be books that have so little ratings that they're not very interested to talk about.